This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream. Watch thousands of high-quality documentaries and get access to Nebula using the link in the description. May 21, 1911. More than 200,000 people gathered at the Issy-les-Moulineaux airfield in the south of Paris to celebrate the start of the big air race. Some of the best aviators of the time were invited to compete for the prize of 200,000 francs. It was a big event, and that is why among the crowds on the airfield were not only ordinary French citizens, but high-ranking government officials as well. The race began early in the morning with the first airplane lifted into the air, but in less than an hour after the start, the event was overshadowed by a tragedy. Right after takeoff, one of the planes crashed into the crowd, killing one of the spectators. Although tragic, just like the loss of any human life, the death of a single person at first didn't seem to be that much of an extraordinary occurrence. After all, various fatal accidents happen quite often. In fact, that very same day, an airplane in Russia also crashed into a crowd, killing 5 and injuring around 100 spectators. But with the airplane crash in Paris, it was not how many victims that was important, but rather who had died and what the consequences of the accident were. This one crash of a tiny airplane in 1911 cost France not just the life of a single spectator, but arguably the death and injuries of tens of thousands of French soldiers on the battlefields of World War I. When learning history, it is surprising how often you find that a small event or detail that may seem insignificant at the time may have had such a huge influence on the future. And at some point it is almost inevitable that you start asking yourself the question, what if? What if the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna had accepted a young painter named Adolf? What if the judgment of the Soviet colonel who received a false signal of an American nuclear attack had been different that day? What if the guy from Paper Skies didn't have an accent? And while
getting the answer to that last question is quite easy, finding the answer for events of historical importance is most often simply impossible.
That doesn't make those questions any less interesting, though. Quite the opposite. They were and always will be a reason for multiple historical debates. One such historical event was the crash of a small airplane in France on May 21, 1911. I'm sure most of my viewers here are big aviation fans, but I bet not many of you remember a French aviator named Louis-Émile Tren, even though in the early days of aviation his name became world famous. This, however, was not primarily due to his accomplishments as a pilot, but because Louis-Émile accidentally could have beheaded, in this case literally, the government of the French Republic. One of the pioneers of aviation, Louis-Émile Tren, was born in Saint-Étienne, France on October 22, 1877. From an early age, Louis-Émile found an interest in mechanics and engineering. He worked in his father's repair shop, fixing bicycles, sewing machines, and automobiles, but his main passion was motorcycles. Not being able to fulfill his passion for engineering at home, he left Saint-Étienne and moved to Paris. He tried his skills in various areas, but financial success came to Louis-Émile with designing vending machines. The revenue he started to receive now was enough not only for comfortable living, but also to financially support his new passion – airplanes. He soon received a pilot's license and, starting in 1910, built several airplane models of his own design, which for the time were quite advanced. The French army even placed an order for a dozen of Tren's airplanes. But despite this promising future, the aviation career of Louis-Émile Tren appeared to be short-lived. The main reason was the huge shock that Louis-Émile suffered after his accident on May 21, 1911. That day, he was among 20 aviators invited to compete in the air race from Paris to Madrid. The race was sponsored by the French millionaire Henri Deutsch de la Meurthe, who offered an impressive prize of 200,000 francs. The event brought together some of the most famous aviators of the time, like Roland Garros, Jules Védrine, André Beaumont, and others, among whom was also Louis-Émile Tren. For Louis-Émile, this wasn't his first such event, and unlike other aviators, he always flew airplanes of his own design. That day he was to fly in his third model, which Tren had already used in previous races and considered to be quite reliable. The first pilot took off at 10 after 5 a.m., followed by other pilots at short time intervals. Everything went smoothly until the turn of Jules Védrine, whose airplane, due to mechanical issues, crashed on takeoff. There were no casualties and the airplane suffered only minor damage, but the accident attracted the attention of the crowd, and dozens of curious spectators rushed onto the airfield, leaving the designated viewing area. To drive them back to safety, a squadron of cuirassiers was sent immediately, and it was exactly this moment when Louis-Émile Tren took off in his airplane. But just a few moments after he became airborne, Louis-Émile suddenly found his engine quickly losing power. Tragic, unfortunate, even comical, it's really hard to choose just one word when describing the crazy sequence of events that happened moments after Louis-Émile's airplane lifted into the air. There were even some rumors that the famous bomb scene from the classic 1966 Batman movie was actually inspired by the events that occurred at the Issy-les-Moulineaux airfield in 1911.
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
Anyways, right after takeoff, Louis-Émile noticed that his engine all of a sudden started to lose power and the airplane's speed was rapidly decreasing. Tren quickly understood that he wouldn't be able to continue the flight and an emergency landing was inevitable. But the problem was that ahead of him, just beyond the edge of the airfield, were the houses of Parisian neighborhood. Trying to avoid a crash and casualties, Louis-Émile made probably the only correct decision possible: to turn his airplane around and land back on the airfield. Not wasting a second, he immediately turned his plane, but to his horror, he saw a squadron of cuirassiers who were now crossing the airfield where he had taken off a moment ago. Trying to save people and horses, he turned the plane more to the right, but here he found a crowd of spectators who had scattered out of their designated area. Pulling the yoke desperately, he tried to fly over the crowd, but the airplane, which by that moment had lost power completely, crashed into the ground. Louis-Émile, who was not injured even the slightest, later recalled that until the very last moment he thought that he had managed to fly over the crowd. Unfortunately, the reality was different. While avoiding the cuirassier squadron and the crowd of spectators, Tren's airplane crashed into a small group of people. And it happened that out of 200,000 spectators present on the airfield that day, this small group appeared to be a bunch of high government officials. Buried under the crashed airplane was the Prime Minister of France, Ernest Monnet. He was found unconscious, suffering from multiple internal injuries, 2 fractured bones in his right leg, a broken nose, and a frightfully torn scalp. His condition was so bad that at the time there were serious doubts whether he would be able to survive at all. The Prime Minister's son was also injured, as well as Henri Deutsch de la Meurthe, who probably at the moment deeply regretted his decision to sponsor this event. But the least fortunate appeared to be the French Minister of War Henri Berthaud. The rotating propeller first cut off his right hand, which he raised to fend off the blow, and the next moment smashed his head, killing the minister instantly. The tragedy at Issy-les-Moulineaux airfield deeply shocked not only France, but the whole world, making the accident in Paris one of the main news topics. Almost immediately, a special government commission started the investigation of the accident. A few days later, the commission concluded that given his situation, Louis-Émile Tren did his utmost to avoid casualties and there was no way he could have predicted the engine malfunction. Thus, the accident and the casualties that occurred were not his fault. But despite being officially exonerated from killing the minister and despite having a promising future career building aircraft, Louis Tren eventually decided to leave aviation. And soon Louis-Émile sold his aircraft business and, until his death in 1939, focused solely on the biggest passion of his youth, motorcycles. And that may look like the end of the story of yet another tragic though unremarkable accident, but with the outbreak of World War I, 3 years after the accident in Paris, it appeared that Louis Tren's crash may have become the reason, although indirectly, for the enormous human casualties that France suffered in the first month of the war, including the French army's deadliest day ever. Out of all wars that humanity has suffered through all of its history, World War I was arguably the most shocking. Of course, the level of atrocities and human casualties during World War II are unmatched by anything in history, and let's hope they never will be, but in some way World War II was just an upscale projection of the preceding war. Meanwhile, the outbreak of the Great War caused a profound and horrible shock due to the massive human casualties and tremendous scale of violence unknown in any previous war. One of the main reasons for such enormous losses in particular was the discrepancy between the outdated battle tactics and the existing modern weaponry, such as artillery and machine guns. But when speaking about France, which was among the countries that suffered the highest losses during World War I, there was yet another, quite unique factor. It's difficult to notice it if you watch French soldiers in old black and white videos, but when you add accurate colors to the historical images, you will see that the soldiers of one of the biggest and most powerful armies in the world were dressed in blue jackets and red trousers. It's hard to believe that, but at the time when battlefields were now expanded into the heights of the skies and depth of the seas, the French army with its brightly colored uniform seems to still be stuck in the age of the Napoleonic Wars. Of course, not everyone in the French government was indifferently accepting of the existing military uniform. Quite to the contrary, the army uniform in France had for years been a topic of multiple political debates, but sadly, those politicians had prevailed who claimed that camouflaged uniform was a symbol of weakness and cowardice, and that the army should keep the patriotic colors in its uniform since it better represented the French battle spirit. Unfortunately, it was not the politicians, but regular soldiers who would have to pay the price for such cheap patriotic statements, and the final price appeared to be extremely high. 3 weeks after the outbreak of World War I, during the Battle of the Frontiers, the French army lost 27,000 killed in just a single day, not counting missing, wounded or captured. August 22, 1914, even until today, remains the French army's deadliest day, and not only in World War I, but in its entire history. None of the belligerent countries in any battle of World War I suffered greater single-day losses than France did during the Battle of the Frontiers. It is believed that one of the reasons for the French army's enormous losses was in particular the bright military uniform that made French soldiers perfectly visible and easy targets for the German machine gunners. It would take about a year before the whole French army would switch to the so-called Horizon Blue, a new blue-gray uniform that made French soldiers less visible to the enemy. But interestingly enough, way before the Horizon Blue, the French army had started to learn about another color, Reseda. 3 years before the outbreak of World War I, the French Minister of War at the time devoted himself to drastically reforming the French army to better respond to modern warfare. Despite massive political opposition, the minister in particular managed to start the so-called Tenue Reseda project, whose goal was for the French army to adopt a new gray-green military uniform. The first examples of the new uniform had already been manufactured and sent to the army for testing, and eventually the uniform would probably have been accepted by the French army, if not for the sudden death of the minister, which eventually led to the abandonment of the Reseda project, leaving the French army to enter World War I still wearing blue jackets and bright red trousers. The name of that minister was Henri Berthoud, the one and only victim of this small airplane crash at the Issy-les-Moulineaux airfield in 1911. And here, it's really hard not to ask the question, what would the history of France in World War I be if one young and talented engineer had stuck to his passion of building motorcycles and never became interested in flying airplanes? The little-known 1911 crash of Louis-Émile Train, although mind-blowing, is just one of hundreds of other astonishing historical what-if moments. What if the last Iranian Shah hadn't thrown the largest and the most expensive port in the world? What if the USSR hadn't collapsed? What if the temperature at the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger had been different? If you want to know the answers to these questions, check out CuriosityStream, which houses thousands of high-quality documentaries. Plus, when using my link below in the description, you can get access to all documentaries for less than $1.50 a month. But there is something more I'd like to say. When you sign for CuriosityStream, you will also get free access to Nebula, a streaming video platform built by and for independent creators like Mustard, History Buffs, Real Engineering, and a bunch of others, and more recently, Paper Skies as well. Having my videos now listed beside those of some of the world-famous content creators is no doubt a great honor, but to me, most importantly, joining Nebula means an amazing opportunity to create the content I want to create. Since many of my stories are war-related, making them is always a big risk, because they can easily be demonetized by YouTube. And if you think I'm exaggerating, here is a real example from my old channel, where my video about the Norwegian scientific rocket that could have accidentally started a nuclear war was marked and then confirmed by manual review as not suitable for YouTube due to the 10 seconds of scenes with firearms and nudity. Those dangerous scenes, as I learned later, appear to be a shot of the nuclear bomb explosion and a famous snake dance by Salma Hayek. How do I know that? I have re-uploaded that video, blacking out all inappropriate according to YouTube images, and funny thing, the new version didn't have any problems with monetization. But with my videos on Nebula, I won't need to do that. And that is why I'm super excited to say that now I will be creating videos on topics that were always sitting in my list untouched, like for example some stories from the history of Soviet aviation, which I consider too risky for YouTube. You can enjoy all videos on Nebula without any ads or sponsorship messages, and the best part is that you get Nebula for free when you sign up for CuriosityStream. And it's not just a trial, you will have access to Nebula for free as long as you have a CuriosityStream subscription. So click the link below in the description to get an entire year of both CuriosityStream and Nebula for less than $15 by going to curiositystream.com/paperskies and using the promo code paperskies when you sign up.